Hi, dear friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I hope you all are well and ready to learn something new today. Have you ever wanted to speak English fluently but found it difficult? Do you sometimes struggle to find the right words when speaking? Or maybe you feel nervous and afraid of making mistakes? If yes, then don't worry. You are not alone. Many students face the same problem. The biggest challenge for English learners is vocabulary. If you don't know enough words, it's hard to express yourself. Sometimes, when you listen to native speakers, you hear new words that you don't understand. This can be frustrating and make you feel like giving up. Another problem is confidence. Many learners are afraid to speak because they think they will make mistakes. They worry about what others will think and feel shy when speaking in English. But remember, making mistakes is part of learning. Now, what if I told you there is a simple way to improve your English fluency? A way to learn more words, understand English better, and speak with confidence? The answer is reading. Yes, reading can help you become fluent in English. In today's lesson, I will tell you a story that shows how reading can change everything. So stay with me until the end, and let's begin. There was a student who wanted to improve his English. He had been learning English for a long time, but he still couldn't speak fluently. Every time he tried to have a conversation, he struggled to find the right words. He knew many words in his mind, but when it was time to speak, he forgot them. It was frustrating because he wanted to express his thoughts clearly, but the words just wouldn't come out. In school, he studied English grammar and vocabulary. He did well in writing and reading exercises, but speaking was a different challenge. Whenever the teacher asked him a question, he felt nervous. He tried to answer, but he often made mistakes. Sometimes he used the wrong words, and other times he couldn't complete his sentences. The other students in his class seemed to speak more confidently, which made him feel even more shy. Outside of school, he wanted to practice English with other people, but he was too afraid. When he went to a shop and the cashier spoke to him in English, he panicked and didn't know how to respond. When he met tourists who asked for directions, he wanted to help, but he was scared of making mistakes. Even when he tried to practice with his friends, he felt embarrassed. He started to avoid speaking in English as much as possible. If someone spoke to him in English, he just smiled and answered with short words like yes or no. He wished he could speak confidently like other people, but he didn't know how to improve. He thought, maybe I'm just not good at learning languages. One day, he decided to try watching English videos. He watched native speakers talk, but they spoke too fast. He couldn't understand everything, and he felt discouraged. Then he tried listening to English songs, but he couldn't catch all the words. He felt stuck. No matter how much he studied, he still couldn't speak fluently. He started to lose motivation. He thought, maybe English is too difficult for me. But deep inside, he still had a dream to speak English fluently and confidently. He just needed to find the right way to improve. Little did he know that a simple habit would change everything for him. One day, while sitting alone in the school cafeteria, the student looked frustrated. He had just come from his English class, where he had tried to answer a question but got stuck halfway. His classmates had answered fluently, while he had struggled to form a complete sentence. He sighed, staring at his food, but not eating. Just then, his friend, David, sat down next to him. David was very good at English. He spoke fluently, used the right words, and never seemed nervous when talking. The student had always wondered how David became so good at English. He knew David hadn't lived in an English-speaking country, so how did he learn to speak so confidently? David noticed his friend's sad expression and asked, "Hey, what's wrong?" The student hesitated for a moment, then said, "I just don't understand. I study English every day, but I still can't speak well. Every time I try, I forget words or say the wrong thing. It's really frustrating." David smiled and said, "I used to feel the same way." The student was surprised. "Really? But you speak so well. How did you improve?" David leaned forward and said, "I'll tell you a secret. Reading. Read every day, and your English will improve." The student looked confused. "Reading? But I want to speak English, not just read it." David nodded. "I know, but reading helps more than you think. When you read, you learn new words, see how sentences are formed, and understand grammar naturally. The more you read, the more comfortable you become with English. And when you know more words, it becomes easier to speak." The student thought about this for a moment. He had never really considered reading as a way to improve speaking. He always thought that speaking practice was the only way to get better. But he trusted David, so he decided to give it a try. "Okay," he said, "but where do I start? English books are difficult." David smiled again and said, "Start with something simple. Don't read difficult novels or textbooks. Find easy English books, short stories, or even children's books. The key is to read something you can understand and enjoy. Read every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes. The student nodded, feeling a little more hopeful. That evening, after finishing his homework, he decided to follow David's advice. He searched online for easy English stories and found a short story for beginners. At first, he felt nervous. What if he didn't understand the words? What if reading was too difficult? But he reminded himself, just try. Even if I don't understand everything, I can learn little by little. That night, the student sat down with his first English story. It was a short, simple story for beginners, but even then, he felt a little nervous. He opened the book and started reading the first sentence. Almost immediately, he saw a word he didn't understand. He frowned and thought, should I stop? Maybe this is too difficult for me. But then he remembered David's advice. Read every day, even if it's just a little. Determined, he took out his dictionary and looked up the meaning of the new word. He wrote it down in a small notebook. Then he continued reading. A few sentences later, he found another difficult word. Again, he used his dictionary and wrote it down. This process was slow. He felt like he was stopping too much, and it took him a long time to finish even one page. But he didn't give up. Every day he set aside time to read. Some days he read for just 10 minutes. Other days, he read for 30 minutes. At first, it was frustrating. He had to check the dictionary many times, and his notebook was quickly filling up with new words. But something interesting started to happen. After a week, he noticed that some words appeared again and again in the story. At first, he needed to check their meanings, but after seeing them multiple times, he started to remember them naturally. He didn't need to check the dictionary as often. After 2 weeks, he realized that he was reading a little faster. The sentences that once felt confusing now made more sense. He understood the structure of the sentences better. He also noticed that his brain started recognizing English grammar without him even trying to memorize the rules. After 3 weeks, something amazing happened. One day, when he was speaking with his classmates, he used a new word without thinking about it. It was a word he had learned from his reading. He was surprised. I didn't even try to remember that word, but it just came to my mind. This gave him more motivation. Now, reading was not just a study habit, it became something he enjoyed. He started reading short stories, then moved on to longer ones. He found books about topics he liked, which made reading even more fun. He also noticed another change. His listening skills were improving. Before, when he listened to English, he often couldn't understand because he didn't know many words. But now, after weeks of reading, he recognized more words when people spoke. This made conversations easier to follow. A month passed, and he was no longer the same student who was afraid of English. His vocabulary had grown, his grammar was improving, and he felt more confident when speaking. All of this happened because he had made reading a daily habit. One day, he looked back at the first story he had read. He smiled. This was so difficult for me before, but now I can read it easily. After weeks of reading every day, the student began to notice big changes in his English skills. At first, he had only wanted to understand English better, but something unexpected was happening. His speaking was improving too. One day, during lunch break, he was sitting with his classmates when someone asked him a question in English. Usually, he would feel nervous, hesitate, and struggle to find the right words. But this time, something was different. Without thinking too much, he answered naturally. The words came to his mind more easily than before. His friends looked surprised. "Wow, your English is getting better," one of them said. The student smiled. He hadn't even realized it, but reading had helped him in ways he never expected. Because he had seen so many sentences in books, he now knew how to form sentences correctly. He didn't have to memorize grammar rules. He had learned them naturally from reading. Not only that, but his vocabulary had expanded. Before, he often got stuck because he didn't know the right words. Now, he had many words in his mind, and he could use them when speaking. Whenever he needed a word, it just appeared in his head, as if it had been waiting there all along. Encouraged by his progress, he decided to challenge himself. He started speaking more in class. Whenever the teacher asked a question, he raised his hand. At first, he still made mistakes, but he didn't feel as nervous as before. He had learned from reading that even native speakers don't always use perfect grammar when they talk. What matters is confidence and communication. One evening, while walking home, he saw a tourist standing on the street, looking confused. The tourist was holding a map, trying to figure out where to go. The student hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked up to him. "Excuse me, do you need help?" he asked in English. The tourist smiled. "Oh yes, I'm looking for the train station." Before, this situation would have made the student panic. He would have been too afraid to speak, worried about making mistakes. But now, he felt different. He had seen so many conversations like this in books. He knew exactly what to say. "The train station is that way," he said, pointing in the right direction. "Just walk straight for 5 minutes, and you will see it on the left." "Thank you so much," the tourist said. The student smiled. "You're welcome. Have a nice day." As he walked away, he felt a wave of happiness. He had just spoken English with a real foreigner, and it had felt easy. He didn't have to translate in his head or struggle to find words. The words just came naturally, like they were part of him now. After this experience, he started speaking more and more. He practiced with his classmates, chatted in English with his teacher, and even spoke English at home when he could. Every time he spoke, he felt more comfortable. One day, David, the friend who had given him the reading advice, noticed the change. "Hey, your English is so much better now. What's your secret?" he asked. The student laughed. "I just did what you told me. I read every day, and you were right. Reading helped me learn words, grammar, and even pronunciation. But most importantly, it made me confident." David nodded. That's the power of reading. Once you read enough, English starts to feel natural. It becomes a part of you. At that moment, the student realized something important. Learning English wasn't just about memorizing words or studying grammar. It was about exposure. The more he surrounded himself with English, the more natural it became. Reading had been the key that unlocked his confidence and fluency. And so, he kept reading. Every day, he read a little more, knowing that each book, each page, and each word was bringing him closer to mastering English. One day, something incredible happened. The student was walking through a park when he saw a group of tourists talking near a bench. They seemed to be discussing something, looking at their phones and pointing in different directions. Curious, he listened closely and realized they were speaking English. Before, he would have ignored the situation, afraid that his English wasn't good enough. But today, he felt different. He had been reading for months, learning new words, understanding sentence structures, and getting more comfortable with the language. Without hesitation, he walked up to them and said, "Excuse me, do you need help?" The tourists looked relieved. "Yes, we are trying to find a good restaurant nearby. Do you know any?" one of them asked. At that moment, the student felt something amazing. He wasn't afraid at all. He wasn't thinking about grammar rules. He wasn't translating words in his head, and he wasn't worried about making mistakes. Instead, the words just flowed naturally, as if speaking English had always been easy for him. "Yes, there's a great restaurant just 5 minutes from here. They have really good food, and the prices are not too high. If you walk straight down this road and turn left at the traffic light, you'll see it on the right." "Wow, your English is really good. Are you from here?" one of the tourists asked. The student smiled proudly. "Yes, I'm from here, but I've been practicing English for a long time." "That's great. Your pronunciation is very clear." "Thank you for your help," the tourist said. The student waved goodbye and walked away, feeling a deep sense of achievement. It was the first time he had spoken English so effortlessly. He hadn't even realized it, but somewhere along his journey, his fear had disappeared. The nervousness, the hesitation, the lack of confidence. It was all gone. At that moment, he understood something important. Reading had changed his life. All those days of reading simple stories, writing down new words, and learning grammar naturally had led to this. Reading had not only improved his vocabulary, but had also helped him understand how English was spoken in real life. Without realizing it, he had been training his brain to think in English. Now, English didn't feel like a difficult subject. It felt like a natural part of his daily life. He no longer saw reading as something he had to do. He enjoyed it. It became a habit, something he looked forward to every day. He started reading more books, exploring different topics, and even reading English news articles. And the best part? His journey was just beginning. He knew that fluency wasn't about being perfect. It was about confidence, practice, and continuous learning. And as long as he kept reading, he would keep improving. From that day on, he made a promise to himself. He would never stop learning. And so every day he picked up a book and read, not because he had to, but because he loved it. As the student continued his journey, he realized something truly powerful. The key to improving his English wasn't just in memorizing lists of words or sitting through grammar lessons. It wasn't about forcing himself to speak when he wasn't ready or comparing himself to others who seemed more fluent. The key was something so simple, yet so profound: reading. When he first started reading, it wasn't easy. He felt unsure of himself, overwhelmed by the new vocabulary, and frustrated at times. But each time he opened a book, he took a small step forward. Every page he read, every word he learned, every sentence he understood, it all added up. Over time, he began to see the progress. His vocabulary grew, his understanding of grammar improved, and most importantly, his confidence grew. Reading wasn't just about understanding the words on the page, it was about seeing English in action. Through the books, he discovered how sentences were structured, how different tenses were used, and how native speakers communicated in everyday life. By reading, he was able to experience English the way native speakers did. It was no longer just a subject in a textbook, it became a part of his life. And it wasn't just his speaking that improved. His listening skills, too, were getting stronger. He began to understand movies, songs, and conversations in English much better. When he listened to people speak, he could recognize the words they used, the way sentences flowed, and the rhythm of the language. All of this happened because reading had exposed him to so much English, day after day. So, what is the main lesson we can learn from this story? The truth is simple. Reading is one of the most effective ways to improve your English. Whether you're a beginner or someone who has been learning English for years, reading every day will help you in ways you can't even imagine. If you want to speak English more fluently, start by reading. It doesn't matter if you're just beginning or if you're already at an intermediate level. Choose books that are simple and enjoyable. It could be children's books, short stories, or even articles and blogs about topics you enjoy. The important thing is to make reading a daily habit. At first, you might find it difficult. You might come across words you don't know or struggle to understand the meaning of some sentences. But don't worry, this is part of the process. Every time you encounter a new word or a tricky sentence, it's an opportunity to learn. Use a dictionary, write down new words, and keep going. The more you read, the easier it becomes. The best part is that reading is not just something you do to learn, it's something you enjoy. As you get better, you'll start reading for fun. You'll get lost in stories, and you'll begin to see how the language comes alive. You won't have to force yourself to study anymore. Instead, you'll look forward to your daily reading time because it will feel like a natural part of your life. So, if you're serious about improving your fluency in English, start reading today. Choose something simple, make it a habit, and keep pushing yourself. Remember, every book, every page, and every word you read will take you one step closer to fluency. The journey might not always be easy, but it will be worth it. The more you read, the more you will see your English improve, until one day you'll realize that speaking English fluently isn't a dream anymore. It's your reality. So, to all of you who are learning English right now, keep reading, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. You've got this, and the more you read, the more fluent you will become.